Awareness, the final frontier. This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to another episode of Awareness Explorers. I'm Jonathan Robinson, your co-host, and with my friend and co-host,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And I love these explorations with you, Brian, because I always learn new things. And today's exploration is about what the hell makes for a good human being. You know, we talk about awakening, and I'm sure that that's one ingredient of it, but it's really an interesting topic. We're all after something. We're all after being a good human being, but we never define what that is. And if we don't define it, it's pretty hard to hit a target that we don't define.
Yeah, it is. But I'm not sure everybody is after being a good human being. I think many people are after fulfilling their own desires, whatever they
Well,
may
looking
be.
at some of our politicians, I could agree with you that not everybody's after being a good human being. And you're right that we have many different motivations. But if we could perhaps get a picture of what for us is our target, that might help us to move in that direction. I think I've shared this story before on Awareness Explorers, but it's a good one. When I was in college, my roommate was a great basketball player, and he would challenge me to a game of basketball one-on-one, and I would refuse until I came up with a brilliant idea. And that was, I said, I could agree to a game of one-on-one basketball if I could bring a 1-ounce gadget onto the court and place it wherever I want. And he agreed to those terms. So we came out to the court. I brought out my 1-ounce gadget, which looked a little bit like this. It was basically a blindfold. I placed it over his eyes and I said, let the games begin. And the moral of the story really is that I was able to beat one of the best basketball players in LA because at least I knew where the target was. And my total lack of skill was less important than knowing at least the general direction of where the hoop was. So I think that's true in terms of becoming the type of person we want to be, that if we define the target, then even if you're not a good meditator or you're not particularly motivated, you still will be making efforts in the right general direction. And I think a lot of people don't make efforts in the right general direction. They focus on just making as much money or power as possible, and they miss what might be called a fulfilling and good human being. So those are my initial thoughts. How about yours?
Well, I have two thoughts, and they both have to do with our two-wing analogy. One is that if being a good human being involves, if your idea of being a good human being involves what you will accomplish in life, and what you might want to accomplish in life is awakening to your true nature or simply happiness. I mean, I think that most people, if you dig down deep enough to what they want and ask why they want it, why they want that,
Mm-hmm.
it's happiness for everybody. Happiness, though, what we don't realize is that happiness is true happiness, the uncaused happiness, the ground, the base state of human beings. You once called it our birthright, is not related to circumstances. So I think that being a good human being is not so much about what you get, but about what you do, how you interact. And I think that for me, there are really only two elements to that. One is love, and the other is its offshoot, kindness.
Mm-hmm. I think those are, of course, key ingredients. You know, Marty Seligman, psychologist who kind of created positive psychology, said that there were 5 ingredients to happiness. Real briefly, they were positive emotions, something he called engagement, which is like getting lost in activities like sports or your career or whatever, relationships, good relationships, meaning, something that's of meaning, and accomplishments. I like that multi-ingredient approach because I think whenever you see someone who is so focused on one aspect of life, like either money or power or fame, or even some people who are just focused on awakening, they get very off balance and they don't necessarily appear like who I would want to be as a good human being. Now, of course, when I asked 100 spiritual leaders what the purpose of human life was, they put it simply as to be in touch with the love and peace inside you, and then to be of service to people in the world. And I think that's a nice, simple definition, but there are even more granular definitions that can help us get clearer on exactly what direction we want to go in. And it might be very different for different people. You know, different cultures have said that this behavior might be some kind of sexual behavior is terrible, and others have said, well, that's great to explore. You know, so there's cultural differences, there's personal differences, but I think that we can get a fair amount of agreement as we look into certain traits or characteristics that most people would say, yeah, I'd like to go in that direction. Your
Well,
thoughts?
yeah, it seems to me that if you're talking about being a good human being, and it means, are you contributing to more suffering among your fellow creatures, or are you alleviating a certain amount of suffering, at least contributing to the alleviation of suffering among your fellow creatures? And by creatures, I include humans and animals.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting measurement. I think that is a good measurement. Now, some people contribute a lot, but they have a suffering life. You know, somebody like, let's say, Martin Luther King, he had a pretty challenging life and was very stressed out a lot of the time, and he contributed an immense amount. So, you have to balance out the contribution factor with the happiness enjoyment factor, I think, to some extent. And where that balance is will be different for different people. But I think some people focus way too much on the happiness part of that, and they don't really contribute a whole lot. And that also looks a little bit off.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about by happiness. Happiness is defined differently by different people. And most people define it as having the experiences that you want. And I don't define it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it depends on what we're talking about. I mean, I think happiness is our default state, which is covered up by our ideas about what's wrong with the past and the future and what we want to fix and what we want to change in ourselves and others. And when you drop that, happiness, the true uncaused happiness, slowly reveals itself. And at that point, it's actually contagious. It can actually affect people in your circle. The happier, the more in touch with your innate happiness you become, the more easily you can spread it to others. And my idea of a good person is one who can spread that to others. But as you mentioned, some people contribute a great deal to society, a great deal to improving the lives and happiness of others. Your example, Martin Luther King, but they struggled. They had a difficult life in order to do it. And that's a sacrifice. And that's another element that I think we should bring into it, that sometimes sacrifice, personal sacrifice, might be necessary to help bring more good, more happiness to the most amount of people.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking as we were talking about this subject, like who are the heroes that almost everybody looks up to? And they're kind of disappearing. We used to have more heroes. And of course, we have like sports heroes or politician heroes, but not everybody looks up to them. I'd be curious what you think might be worldwide heroes or highly regarded people. The only one I came up with this point, or the two I came up with, were the Dalai Lama and the Pope. Does anybody else occur to you that maybe billions of people or hundreds of millions would look up to?
Living,
Yeah.
um, I guess you could say that. I mean, when you bring in politicians, a lot of people look up to them, but because our world has become so divided, it's hard to use them as examples. I think the
Hmm.
Dalai Lama is really good. Most people think he's a good person. Most
Yeah.
people don't think he's got, a lot of dark sides or ulterior motives or other features that would put what he does, make what he does suspect. But we have pretty strict values when we talk about who our heroes are, especially in sports and the arts, because a lot of really wonderful artists, sports figures, inventors who have contributed to enriching our lives were not necessarily good people. They were not necessarily kind to each other.
Yeah.
And so it's almost impossible to equate accomplishment with goodness unless your only criterion is how much did this person's activity enrich the lives of others. And if you have an artist who was mean to his or her spouse and children, who created a lot of happiness in the world, how do you weigh whether that makes a good person or not? It's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking, well, like a hero I had, or I read an article once that was very interesting. And the question was, what living person has brought the most happiness to people in the world? And it went through different people. Guess who ended up number one?
Oh, I have no idea.
Paul McCartney.
I was just gonna guess Paul McCartney.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was an interesting pick because, billions of people know of his songs, and they bring a lot of happiness, and he hasn't really sullied his reputation through something that would be like a really big scandal, whereas somebody like, I don't know, Michael Jordan, he has a lot of strange things about him, and other famous sports figures or politicians or things like that, but he's relatively, most people think of him as a good guy,
Yeah,
and he brings a lot of happiness. So, what makes the Dalai Lama? What are the traits that we like? Well, they've contributed a lot. They're not jerks. They seem to be somewhat balanced people. They both have a good sense of humor. There's a lot of things that they both talk about love. So there's a lot of things in common there. And I think also they're both very authentic, which is one of the traits I think that people are looking for in an ideal human, loving, authentic. And another trait that I think is part of being our best self is we have something that we're pursuing, a cause bigger than just our ego. And that's really important because people who we see as just pursuing their own ego cause, we tend not to think of as heroes, even if they have great accomplishments.
yes, that's true. And you mentioned authenticity. I read a poll recently that about traits that people admired in other people, and authenticity was probably number one.
Mm,
People really don't like phonies. But I when you mentioned Paul McCartney, in my mind, I mean, I love Paul McCartney too. In my mind, Tony Bennett came to mind because he's just a wonderful singer, but apparently he was a pretty good human being. He was one of the first white artists who joined the civil rights movement. He was
mm,
generous and friendly and warm, although he went through some tough times with drugs. But he shared his gifts with his audience with a sense of love and generosity.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Generosity is a big one, that we really respect, and we want to be a generous person. And, I've been listening to interviews with people who've had near death experiences, and they often talk about how love and generosity are so key to what we're here to do. I'm also watching on Apple TV the 6 or 8 part series on Ben Franklin, and he's one of my personal heroes. I mean, he made huge contributions to humanity, and you see it. The United States probably wouldn't even exist if it weren't for Ben Franklin. And one of the things Ben Franklin did, which you might know about, is when he was younger, he made a list of what were the 12 or 13 traits he thought were most important in a human being. And I don't have a list of them here. I know some of them probably wouldn't be what we would think of now. Like I think prudence was one of them, or thriftiness or something. But not that those are bad things, but he made a list, and he every year would measure whether he was making progress towards these traits. And he said that the only trait he could never make progress on was humility, because anytime he made progress on it, he saw that it interfered with his humility. So,
That's so interesting. That's sort of like a humble way of not having humility.
yes. But that's an interesting way of doing it, making a list of the things that fit your idea of an ideal human, and then measuring if you're making progress. I mean, that's how we make progress in a lot of areas of our life, whether it be money or career or other things. But we don't necessarily do that with either measuring our awakening, which might be a little bit hard to do, but this is all subjective. So you could measure, if I said, are you more loving than you were 10 years ago? You'd probably have a very clear answer to that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And it's very interesting because it's going to be very different for different people when you talk about what makes a good human being. But because
Well,
people
I don't know if that's true. I think in different cultures, you get very different answers. But I think within a single culture, a lot of people would say the same 5, 6, 7 traits.
well, I suppose that may be true. That may just be human nature. We tend to like certain things, although some people will hold up achievement as one of their benchmarks for whether a person is good, and other people will simply use kindness or generosity.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings, there's the golden rule of do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Treat other people the way you would like to be treated is such I mean, the reason they call it the golden rule is it's such a great rule. Of course, sometimes it doesn't work. I worked for a company once that had two co-leaders, and one person really liked to talk and and the other person really liked to be brief. And one would get really annoyed when the other would talk too much, so that when he gave answers, he would give very, very short answers, which really annoyed the big talker because he wanted just the opposite. So they both wanted the opposite from each other.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That happens in relationships a lot too.
yeah, it's true. But I think that the other rule is the famous one of love your neighbor as yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
I would expand upon the definition of that, because in one way it could mean love your neighbor the same way you would if that neighbor were yourself. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say the deeper meaning is love your neighbor as yourself means love your neighbor because your neighbor is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
are simply one energy appearing in various temporary forms. And what's looking out through my eyes is the same as what's looking out through yours. And when we really know that, when we really see that and get a feel for it, then I think compassion to others comes naturally without effort. And compassion is, I think, a word that we need to add to the list.
Yeah, definitely compassion. I'd also add humility. We like people who are humble. We mentioned people who have a mission or a purpose beyond themselves. And it's interesting, some people thrive with some of these traits really, really well. And then they'll have something that's not in that part of that ideal human, and it kind of wobbles us. Like, take somebody like Elon Musk, who has very big mission of climate change and getting and place off the earth in case we screw this place up, and other missions like that. But some of his politics or some of his ways of dealing with people, or lack of humility, make it so that he's not universally seen as a hero for a lot of people. So you can excel in one area and be a total buffoon in another area, and that is important to know, because it's really a matter of getting a lot of different traits in relative balance to each other that makes for a really good human being, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah, it's true. And people are amazingly complex. And I don't think there has ever walked on this earth a human who is all good or all bad. People are complex. And because of this, one of my personal ideas for what makes a good person is a person who doesn't have an idea that other people should be different than they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could call that total acceptance or unconditional love. Yeah, we like to be around those people for sure.
Unconditional love, yeah. I mean, it is the most powerful force in the universe.
Yeah, yeah. When I ask people to focus on someone that they love or feel that loves them unconditionally, probably 9 times out of 10, they choose their dog.
That's why people love dogs.
Exactly. Yeah. So when we think of people who really inspire us, like, oh, that person really, is an amazing human being. What is it they're doing? Well, when I thought of my list of that people, a lot of them had a pretty strong mission, whether it be Martin Luther King, or, John F. Kennedy, or Gandhi, or Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa. They were all people with a very strong mission. And I'm wondering, you could ask, you could learn a lot about a person by who are your heroes of a really good human being. I'm wondering who your list would be, Brian.
Well, interesting because I can think of one off the top of my head that I've always admired ever since I was a little kid.
Oh,
And
you shouldn't mention me, Brian. No, I mean,
I haven't known you that long.
okay.
I was already grown up when I met you.
Uh-huh.
Well, relatively grown up. But when I was a kid, we had a neighbor named Mrs. Friedrichs.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know what she did for a living. I have no idea what her accomplishments were. She was an older woman, older than my parents. She was German. She had a very cute accent, and she lived in a nice house. And she treated all the kids in the neighborhood like they were extremely precious and interesting and fascinating. And she loved, and so we would like be walking around and she might be outside and she would stop and ask us questions, and she would make us feel so valued and not just like kids, like we were equals to her. And
Mm.
this woman, I have no idea if she accomplished anything whatsoever in her life. I have no idea, but I've always thought this is a good person.
Yeah, yeah. It's so nice when, I mean, it so much uplifts the heart when we meet a person like that, or we read about a person like that, or we even hear about a person like that. And I think it's important that we feed ourselves those types of impressions, because there's so much, we read so much about darkness in humanity, and in our politics and things like that, that it can kind of form a crustiness over the heart unless you're inspiring your heart as well. And there is a lot of good people, and there's a lot of goodness that comes from people that we don't hear about. But I want to read you something that really touched me from one of my heroes. He was voted the most influential person of the 20th century. You know who I'm talking about?
No.
A guy named Albert Einstein. And when I read this letter, which I'm going to read to folks listening, it really I had Einstein in very high regard before, but it really uplifted my regard for him even more. And it's a letter that Einstein wrote to his stepdaughter a couple of years before he died. And it's very inspiring. So let me just read it and see what you think. So this is Einstein reading to his stepdaughter, or a letter to his stepdaughter. When I proposed the theory of relativity, very few understood me, and what I will reveal now to transmit to mankind will also collide with the misunderstandings and prejudice in the world. I ask you to guard this letter as long as necessary, years, decades, or even longer, until society is advanced enough to accept what I will explain below. There is an extremely powerful force that so far science has not found a formal explanation to. It is a force that includes and governs all other forces and is even behind any phenomenon operating in the universe and has not yet been identified by us. This universal force is love. When scientists looked for a unified theory of the universe, they forgot the most powerful unseen force. Love is light that enlightens those who give and receive it. Love is gravity because it makes some people feel attracted to others. Love is power because it multiplies the best that we have and allows humanity not to be extinguished in their blind selfishness. Love unfolds and reveals. For love, we live and die. Love is God, and God is love. This force explains everything and gives meaning to life. This is the variable that we have ignored for too long, maybe because we're afraid of love, because it is the only energy in the universe that man has not learned to drive at will. To give visibility to love, I made a simple substitution in my most famous equation. Instead of E equals mc squared, we accept that the energy to heal and heal the world can be obtained through love multiplied by the speed of light squared. And we arrive at the conclusion that love is the most powerful force there is because it has no limits. After the failure of humanity in the use and control of the other forces of the universe that have turned us against each other, it is urgent that we nourish ourselves with another kind of energy. If we want our species to survive, if we're to find meaning in life, if we want to save the world and every sentient being that inhabits it, love is the one and only answer. Perhaps we're not yet ready to make a bomb of love, a device powerful enough to entirely destroy the hate, selfishness, and greed that devastates our planet. However, each individual carries within them a small but powerful generator of love whose energy is waiting to be released. When we learn to give and receive this universal energy, we will have affirmed that love conquers all, is able to transcend everything and anything, because love is the essence of life. Powerful words.
Absolutely. That is really powerful. And beautiful. Did he really write that? Because there's a lot of quotes that have been attributed to Einstein over the years that he didn't actually say.
I will have to research it more. It was presented as he wrote it word for word to his stepdaughter.
Wow, it's really great. And that he would recognize that, having an analytical scientific mind, that he could expand his view to something that science couldn't get a grip on, I think is really admirable.
And I think that's one of the traits that makes an ideal human, somebody who not only excels in one area, but can somehow bring that understanding into deeper and other areas of life. That's part of the balance thing. He was a very good musician as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he would say that his ability to daydream, to meditate, to play music was foundational to his being able to be a great scientist as well.
Mhm.
So some of the ingredients we talked about are people who are authentic, loving. I think most of the people that we respect have also overcome a lot of difficulties. That's something that we value as human beings. When we see, somebody like Oprah who came from incredible poverty and sexual abuse to who she is, or other people who have really overcome great challenges, that also inspires us to be better.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
but it's interesting that most of the examples that were coming up are famous people. Uh,
mhm.
and I don't think you have to be famous or accomplished or anything to be a good person.
Yeah, and when you actually get to know somebody who inspires you, who says, that I remember, in the movie As Good as It Gets.
Mhm.
You remember
Yeah.
that movie?
Oh yeah, yeah. I saw it many
Uh,
times.
what's her name? Helen, the woman actor and actress in it. Anyway, she asked for a compliment from Jack Nicholson, and his response is something like, "Watching you makes me want to be a better human being."
Yeah, yeah. I want to be a better man. You make me want to be a better man, is what
Yeah,
he said.
yeah,
Yeah. Helen Hunt, I think was her name.
right, right.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that quote, and that was the reason that I love that movie. And he wanted to be a better man. And what was a better man to him? It was someone who treated other people better,
Yeah.
who made it less about himself and his own problems.
Hmm. I like what Aldous Huxley on his deathbed, somebody asked him something like, so you've, studied humanity and spirituality and all these things. What advice do you have for what we're here to do? And he said, to try to be a little bit kinder.
Yeah, I would vote for that. I would vote for kindness as the most important quality I would ask for in something anyone that I would call a good human being.
Yeah,
Are they
yeah.
kind?
Hmm. That's really key. Interestingly enough, the quickest way to boost your own happiness level is to do an act of kindness for a stranger or a friend. I love that is actually a way to boost your own happiness level, much less, of course, the person that you're helping.
It's really good to know, and people forget that. Another thing that I think is really important in this discussion, we've been talking about what we think makes a good person, and and baked into that is the idea that there is some sort of measuring stick that we hold people against to decide whether or not they are good or bad. And I would say that there's an alternative way of looking at it, which is knowing that most people are a mix of good and bad. And for your own well being and happiness and those of others around you, look for what's good in each person,
Mm,
knowing that it won't all be good, but look for the good in each person, and sometimes treat that other person as if they were how you would imagine them to be if that goodness pervaded their whole selves.
yeah, that's a great idea. In fact, I once interviewed the person who I know personally, who I feel is the most loving. And everybody loves this person, this woman. And she's very loving to everybody. I asked her, what allows you to do that? And her answer was interesting. It was very specific. She said, every time I meet somebody, I remember the moment that they were at their absolute best and most loving and most fully themselves. And I just relate to that part of them.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's great.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's a great technique, because normally I think the default is we respond to almost what is the worst in person and we're protective. Like, oh, I'm not
Mhm,
sure if I can trust that person. That's like
mhm.
maybe not what's worst, but certainly not what's best. We're not necessarily relating to that one time we saw where they did a tremendous act of kindness. Because if we did relate to that person, what would happen is our way of relating to them would be different and their response would be different. And you get into like a virtuous cycle.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about this kind of approach is that not only is it good for other people, but it's good for you too. It's good for your own
Mm,
happiness. I know that my happiness increased when I stopped I stopped emphasizing, or I stopped thinking about what was wrong with other people and what they should do different, and started thinking,
mm.
well, that person is, just let that person, that's the way they are.
They're a perfect them.
Yeah, that's a phrase that from you that I've always liked. Yeah, they're the perfect them. They're every most people in life are doing the best they can. Many people are looking for love. Unfortunately, a lot of them are using faulty techniques that are harmful to themselves or others. But most
Right.
people are doing the best that they can, and most people are flawed. But if you go through life judging others as to whether they are good or bad and deciding which parts of them are wrong and which are not, that's not really going to lead to your or their happiness. But allowing them to be exactly as they are really does. And it doesn't mean you have to be, a doormat. If somebody is abusive, it doesn't mean you can't call them on it. And sometimes you have to say, no, I'm sorry, but that's a hurtful thing that you just did or said. And but you're doing it with love and respect, and you're doing it for the greater good.
Yeah, that gets back to we really respect and admire people who are accepting and loving.
That's right.
Well, so we've talked about a lot of different ingredients and ways to approach that. As I said, the obviously awakening is all helpful or hopefully helpful in this regard. The Ben Franklin method of making a list and trying to move in that direction, is an interesting approach. Reading about people, watching movies even of people who inspire us. I think all those things are real ways to help us move in the direction of who we want to be, and having a clear sense of what that target looks like. So I plan to do a meditation that helps people get a picture of that. But before we do that, any last comments on becoming your ideal self?
Sure, I wouldn't be my authentic self if I didn't bring this up. Pure, choiceless awareness is totally okay with the way you are, with the way the world is, good or bad. And
Yep.
when you identify with that pure background in which all experience appears, which allows everything, then the innate happiness and joy of our nature will come forward.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said it because really you could call it there's a more active approach to becoming more your ideal human being, or more of a what could be called a surrender approach to your true nature. And that goes back to the two wing analogy that we often end up with.
Right, right. So I couldn't resist plugging my wing, even though I've come around to realizing that your wing is also important.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a couple of good wings that are both strong leads to soaring. So with that, I want to push out to our Patreon supporters. You make this possible, and we like to send you a bunch of free stuff and meditations and interview clips. If you're interested in supporting us that way, go to patreon.com/awareness explorers. And with that, let's do a meditation about becoming your ideal self.
Looking forward to it.
So make yourself comfortable. When you're ready, close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and fill your lungs with wonderful fresh air. And then as you exhale, release any tension or stress you may be holding on to. And we'll begin by bringing awareness to just the present moment. Feel the weight of your body supported by whatever you're sitting on. Notice the sensation of your breath as it flows in and out of your body, like gentle waves in the ocean. Now, I invite you to remember a time in your life when you felt like the best version of yourself. Maybe it was a moment of accomplishment or a time when you felt deeply connected within or to others, or a moment of pure joy and contentment. But just think of one or two moments where you felt you were the best version of yourself. Allow yourself to fully immerse yourself into this memory. Notice how you felt in that moment, the sensations in your body, what you were thinking, and what it felt like. Now imagine yourself in the future, living as your ideal self. See yourself embodying the qualities and values that are most important to you. Imagine being able to grab various qualities out of the air, such as love or purpose or authenticity, and bring them magically into your body, where these seeds flourish and grow. Picture yourself moving through life with compassion and kindness and purpose. Visualize yourself interacting with others as your ideal self. Picture yourself maturing into a person of deep wisdom and caring with each month and each year you grow older. As you hold this vision of your ideal self in your mind's eye, notice how it makes you feel. Allow yourself to bask in the sense of empowerment and possibility that comes from knowing you have the ability to step into the full wisdom and love already living within you. Now bring your awareness back to the present moment. Take a moment to express gratitude for this opportunity to connect with your inner wisdom and envision the best version of yourself. Know that all you need to become the best version of yourself is already like a seed within you that you can nourish and feed and grow. As we start to come to the end of this meditation, know that you can carry with you the intention to continuing your nurturing and cultivating of the qualities that align with your ideal self. Know that you have the power to become the person you aspire to be, one moment at a time. And when you're ready, you can gently begin to move or stretch and gently open your eyes and return to your awareness and your surroundings. And take a deep breath in. As you slowly exhale, step into who you truly are and bring it forth into the world. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I think it's important to have some vision or version of yourself that you more want to step into, whether that be through active or surrender approaches. And that we need to feed that inspiration.
Yes. Yes, I think that's important. And then just to add the other wing of the plane, equally important to know that that isn't really you, that that is
Mhm.
just your image of your separate self, and that the real you is what that image appears in.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. We're pointing to the moon.
Yeah, but all of that positiveness, all of that emphasis on goodness is sure a lot better than being a greedy mother, you know what her
Yeah, yeah.
mean, ugly, hateful, selfish, all that stuff. Let's give it a whirl. Let's try for generosity. Let's try for gratitude. Let's try for forgiveness. Let's try for kindness and love. Let's go
I like
for
to
it.
point out, I like to point out that because there's so much, call it shadow or darkness in the world, a little bit of light really shows up pretty bright. Like literally, you open the door for a stranger, and they're like, "Oh my God, you must thank you so much."
There's a song, a line in a song that I've always loved, and the song is "Make Someone Happy," and it was, made famous by Louis Armstrong, but it was originally from a musical, a Broadway musical, and make someone happy, make just won someone happy. And the line that I really loved was, one face that lights when it nears you.
Hmm.
And to be that one person, to be with whose face lights up when you're with them, is that to me says it all.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, my dog is very inspiring to me then.
Yes. I love the idea that when you come home to a dog like yours, that they're just so happy to see you. And I love the fact that every person that I've loved and felt loved by in my life had that quality. Their face would light up.
I've seen a bumper sticker that says something like, I want to be the person my dog thinks I am.
You know, I think that is such a great summary of today's episode.
Yes, yeah.
That's
Anyways,
wonderful.
thank you for listening to us so we can explore these things. And as always, keep exploring.
Keep exploring. Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love. Please note that the quote from Albert Einstein, reputed to have been from a letter written to his daughter, was most likely not actually written by Einstein. But whoever wrote it, it's such a lovely and profound sentiment, we decided to leave it in with this disclaimer. For more information, see the links in the show notes.